What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episodes 8 and 9 of season 1 of Raised by Wolves on HBO Max, a show that continues to fascinate me. I think this is some of the best science fiction to be found on any platform, and Warner Media has already decided to renew it for a season 2. And I couldn't be happier because this show is just bananas. There's so much imagination on display and so much originality, and it's breaking so much new ground. More importantly, it's showing me images and scenes that I've never before seen in any other films or shows in the science fiction genre. So much so that at times I just feel dizzy trying to keep track of all of it. And this is one of those rare examples where a science fiction show has so much depth and detail and creativity that for me it has more in common with like a big giant science fiction novel as opposed to a TV show. And as we look ahead to the season finale coming next week, my only real lingering concern or critique is that perhaps there are one too many mysteries left to be answered, and that the season finale might feel a little overstuffed as a result, or that perhaps we might feel unsatisfied if the show's unable to wrap up all these lingering questions in a satisfactory way. But that's a good problem to have because that means I'm emotionally engaged, I'm intellectually engaged. Having a really excited fan base that's curious about the outcome is precisely what storytellers are hoping for, so fingers crossed they'll manage to stick the landing with next week's season finale. But before I dive into my review properly, I should give a shout out to director Alex Gabassi, who directed episode 8. I thought episode 8 was absolutely riveting, far more so than episode 7, which Alex Gabassi also directed. But who knows, that might be a failing with the writing, because episode 8 had a different writer from episode 7. Sinead Daly wrote episode 8. And then for episode 9, we had the series creator, Aaron Guzikowski, delivering his 5th script for the season, and he'll be back for the season finale as well. And James Hawes, by the way, directed episode 9. The director of episode 10 is to be announced. So rather than offering up a typical review for episodes 8 and 9, I think I'm just going to give shout outs to all my favorite scenes where I just found myself screaming in pure glee at the crazy shit that I was watching on screen. So let's start with the very first scene of episode 8, where we have Marcus quite literally carving his own face off. Obviously it was a dream, but we have a situation where perhaps Caleb is trying to re-emerge from within. But it was just so gross watching him pulling away chunks of his own flesh, revealing his skull. And I'm always a fan when the genres of horror and sci-fi collide in such visceral fashion. But what really made episode 8 special for me were the scenes where Mother returns to the wreckage of the Ark, and she has these lengthy conversations with this android doctor trying to figure out why she's feeling so much pain in her abdomen. And the android doc misdiagnoses it as the giant tumor that's growing inside of her. But this giant tumor, it needs to be fed, and that fluid can come from androids, that fluid can come from the alien life forms that populate this planet, or that fluid can come from human beings, but this tumor/fetus, it needs to be fed constantly. And what really creeped me out was how when Mother reached in to touch it, how it was responding to her touch, but she was unable to pull it out. And over the course of the episode, the room just starts to resemble this strange sci-fi slaughterhouse because you've got the remains of all these other androids hanging on hooks as she's pulling out all their fluid. You got this disgusting alien hanging in the center of the room. And Mother finally learns that her true mission all this time has been to raise this fetus that's inside of her. That is the future of humanity. Raising all these other kids, that was just the dress rehearsal to get her ready. But as I was watching this horrific scene unfold, I just kept thinking to myself, this show makes so many other science fiction shows just feel like they're standing still by comparison. And it's really starting to feel like this show is building toward this massive climax as Marcus's faction keeps getting smaller and Mother's faction keeps getting bigger. Even if she's gathering people against their will, she's walking around with that rapist in the helmet with a tube going from him into her, feeding her fetus, and has kept cracking up at how bonkers and sadistic, but at the same time, how logical all these scenes are. No matter how weird the show gets, it all feels earned, it all feels organic, it all feels like the natural evolution of the plot. We are seeing the development and potential birth of this true sci-fi baby. And for a brief moment, I thought the guy trapped in the helmet was going to somehow find a way to pull the power of the necromancer into him because he finds a way to reverse the blood flow at one point, and when he tries to escape, he seems nearly impervious to gunshots, much like Father and Mother. But in one of the most satisfying moments of the season, Tempest takes the little android head in his backpack that's been keeping his helmet functional. She chucks the head away from him, finally activating the helmet, crushing his skull like a grape, then and there. And then in one of the most surprising moments all season, we see Sue offering up a pint of her own blood to help keep the fetus alive a little bit longer, while Father, who's been restored, goes off in search of more aliens to use as a possible blood source for the fetus. And it's so interesting now seeing all the various divided loyalties where it's almost impossible to keep track of who's supposed to be on which side. All we know is that Sue and Father and Campion and Paul and so many of the other children have banded together to try and protect Mother and save her baby. And speaking of Father, it was an absolute joy seeing Hunter restore his full personality because it's Hunter that determines that the twitching finger is actually Morse code. And he's able to deduce that in spite of the fact that the finger's twitching, what amounts to a prayer to Saul, it's actually Father trying to say the reverse, which is the password to unlock his personality. But at one of the most gruesome moments all season, Marcus gets fed up by the twitching finger and just hacks it off then and there. But it seems like Marcus might be a lost cause at this point. He has completely gotten lost inside of this delusion that somehow Saul is speaking to him or making him the chosen one. He takes his few remaining followers back to the temple where he thinks Saul's going to speak to him. And every time I see that temple, I'm reminded of the 12-sided die from tabletop RPGs. It makes me want to dust off all my old D&D books and get a campaign going. But getting back to the topic at hand, Mother decides to name her fetus for the time being number 7. And there was an interesting moment where she feels agonizing pain when Campion speaks to the baby. I don't know if that was a coincidence or if there's some strange connection. But one of my favorite moments all season is when Mother is scanning one of those metal cards that they find, and she has another vision where she sees one of these 12-sided die kind of relics with this monster head emerging from the top with all this white fluid oozing out of it, and it's surrounded by all these mysterious cloaked figures. I have no idea what was going on there, and I'm going to be incredibly frustrated if we don't learn more in the season finale. But it's those kinds of scenes where you realize we're in the hands of really good storytellers, or at least wildly original storytellers. So many science fiction movies and shows just make the genre feel so played out or so derivative with an endless series of copycats. And this is one of those rare shows that actually keeps you guessing every step of the way. So while the faction surrounding Mother and protecting her baby seems to be very strong and united, Marcus finally finds himself totally devoid of followers when one of his most loyal acolytes attacks him, and I couldn't quite tell what was happening at the end of the episode. This guy attacks him, he hits him repeatedly, he grabs the necromancer eyes off of Marcus, and it appeared as if he was almost shoving one into his head. And I rewatched the scene like 4 or 5 times, and I'm just not entirely certain what is actually happening there, whether or not he inserted one eye, whether or not he inserted any eyes. But Marcus starts to foam out of his mouth. My assumption is that at least one eye was shoved into Marcus's head and that he's undergoing some sort of transformation. But my hope is that the first scene of the next episode will illuminate precisely what was happening there. But there are so many unanswered questions, like where are all these metallic cards coming from? Why was Paul burning them? Why are people having all these visions? Where are all these voices and ghosts coming from? Who are these alien creatures? What are these giant reptile fossils all over the planet? I have no idea how many of these mysteries are going to get paid off. But fingers crossed if the season finale can stick the landing next week. I think Raised by Wolves is going to go down as one of the most dynamic, original, and fresh new concepts that we saw on either the big or small screen in all of 2020. But I think my biggest takeaway overall is that series creator and principal writer Aaron Guzikowski is a writer that we all need to be keeping an eye on for the foreseeable future and whatever projects he might be attached to. But I think that's all the praise I have for this show for now, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. But if you want to talk more, hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax. And please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. But thanks so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.